My name is Chloe. I'm 28 years old, and 6 weeks ago, I discovered that the people I trusted most in the world were the ones secretly betraying me in the one place I thought was safe, my own home. My parents made a copy of my apartment key for my sister, allowing her to come and go as she pleased and turn my life into a waking nightmare. What they didn't know was that, in an effort to protect myself from the outside world, I had accidentally installed a system that would expose all of their lies. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. And before I tell you how this one event changed everything, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real stories about family boundaries and the power of standing up for yourself. My life before all this could be described in one word: stable. After years of grinding away at a marketing agency, I'd taken the terrifying leap into freelance graphic design. And amazingly, it had worked. I'd built a roster of loyal clients who paid on time and valued my work. I was able to afford a beautiful one-bedroom apartment downtown, a light-filled space with exposed brick walls and a huge picture window overlooking a bustling street. It was my sanctuary, a place where I had carefully curated every piece of furniture, hung every piece of art. The scent of lavender and old books filled the air, a stark contrast to the chaotic, potpourri-scented home I grew up in. This space was a reflection of the peace I had fought so hard to build, and most importantly, it was where I felt safe. That safety was important to me, especially after my father passed away from a sudden heart attack 6 years ago. His death left a gaping hole in our family. He was our anchor, our voice of reason, and the only one who seemed to truly understand me. I remember him watching me one afternoon as I diligently worked on a school project while Sophie flitted around the yard. He told me, "You have a quiet strength, Chloe. It will carry you far. Just make sure it doesn't get so quiet that you forget to speak up for yourself." It was a piece of advice I hadn't fully understood until now. Before he passed, he pulled me close and whispered, "Take care of your mother and your sister, Chloe. You're the strong one." Those words, uttered on his deathbed, became a sacred promise I carried with me. I made it my mission. My mother, Linda, was shattered by his death. She became emotionally dependent on me, calling me multiple times a day to talk about the most minor things. My sister, Sophie, who is 4 years younger than me, reacted in a completely different way. It was as if she saw our father's passing as an excuse to abdicate all responsibility. Sophie had always been the golden child. She had golden blonde hair and a smile that could charm anyone, and she used it to her advantage her entire life. While I spent my teenage years studying and working part-time jobs, Sophie spent hers socializing and finding ways to get out of trouble. My parents, especially my mom, enabled her behavior. "She's just finding herself," Mom would say with a sigh. But Sophie's version of finding herself always seemed to come with a hefty price tag, and somehow, I was always the one who had to foot the bill. I remember one time when I was 22 and saving every penny from my first used car. I'd worked double shifts at a coffee shop for 6 months, carefully tucking the cash into an envelope under my mattress. Just as I was getting close, Sophie, then 18, got arrested for shoplifting at a department store. My mom called me, hysterical, saying they needed $500 for bail and didn't have the cash on hand. "You're the only one who can help," she pleaded. My father's promise echoed in my ears. I drove over, handed my mom the envelope of savings, and watched my car fund disappear to fix another one of Sophie's mistakes. Sophie never thanked me. She never even apologized. 2 weeks later, she used cash my parents gave her to buy a new designer handbag. When I confronted my mom about it, she just waved her hand. "Don't be so hard on her, Chloe. She's been through a lot." This pattern wasn't just for emergencies. It bled into our ambitions. A year later, I was meticulously saving for a specialized graphic design certification course that I knew would elevate my skills. It cost $1,200. I was about halfway there when Sophie announced she wanted to be an actress. She found an exclusive acting workshop that cost exactly $800. My parents didn't have the money but insisted it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for her. The pressure campaign began. My mother would call and talk about how this could be Sophie's big break, how sad it would be if she missed out because of money. She'd say things like, "Your design course can wait. You're already so talented." But Sophie needs this boost of confidence. It was classic manipulation. They weren't just asking for money. They were minimizing my dreams to prioritize hers. I gave in, of course. I paid for the workshop. Sophie attended 2 classes and then dropped out because it wasn't creatively fulfilling. The money was gone, and I had to start saving for my course all over again. Each time, my help was never acknowledged as a sacrifice. It was expected as a duty. I was the responsible, reliable older sister. Sophie was the beautiful, impulsive younger sister who couldn't help but find trouble. Our roles were set, and I was too tired to challenge them. I thought moving to a new city, 3 hours away from them, would change the dynamic. I was wrong. It turned out that distance only made their phone calls more urgent, and their requests feel even more imposing, as if my physical absence needed to be compensated for with financial presence. I thought I had created a life of my own, a place where I was in control. But I had no idea that Hurricane Sophie was about to make landfall in my sanctuary, and this time she was going to be let in by my own parents. My calculated peace was shattered on a humid Tuesday afternoon. I was putting the finishing touches on a branding project for a major client, lost in a world of color palettes and typography, when my phone rang with an all-too-familiar, dreaded ringtone, the one I had assigned to my mother. A wave of preemptive exhaustion washed over me. Her calls were never just to say hello. They were prologues to a problem, and that problem almost always had a name: Sophie. I let it ring twice, taking a deep, fortifying breath before pressing accept. "Hi, Mom," I said, forcing a brightness into my voice that I didn't feel. "Chloe, honey." Her voice trembled, a well-rehearsed signal of distress. "Something's happened." I sat up straighter in my chair, my muscles tensing. "Is everyone okay? What's wrong with Sophie?" I asked, because it was almost always something with Sophie. "She's been evicted," Mom sniffled, the words tumbling out. "The landlord said she hasn't paid rent in 3 months, and they changed the locks. All her things are inside and she has nowhere to go." I closed my eyes, a familiar, bone-deep weariness settling in. This was it, the cycle beginning anew. "Mom, I gave her money for last month's rent," I said, my voice strained with the effort of keeping it level. "She promised me she was catching up." "I know, sweetie, I know. But you know your sister. She tried, but then another emergency bill came up." Sophie's emergency bills were always things like concert tickets or a new pair of shoes she had to have. I'd heard every permutation of the excuse. "Can't she stay with Aunt Carol for a bit?" I offered weakly, already knowing the answer. "Oh, no. You know Carol's house is always so cluttered. Sophie would be miserable." "What about a short-term rental? I could help with a deposit." "Chloe, that's just throwing money away." "She needs stability." Every solution I proposed that didn't involve me was shot down. "So where is she now?" I asked, already dreading the inevitable next part of the conversation. "She's here with me and your father. But you know how small our house island. She's sleeping on the couch and it's really not working." The deliberate pause hung in the air, a baited hook. She was waiting for me to volunteer my home, my peace, my sanity. When I remained silent, she pushed on, her voice taking on a pleading, manipulative edge. "Chloe, your father and I were talking. We think Maybe Sophie could stay with you for a little while? Just a couple of weeks. Until she finds a new job and gets back on her feet. Number. The word screamed in my mind. It was a complete sentence, a boundary I desperately needed to set. My apartment was more than just a place to live. It was the headquarters of my business. The one thing I had built for myself, by myself. Sophie's chaotic energy would be a wrecking ball to the life I had so carefully constructed. Mom, I don't think that's a good idea, I started carefully. I work from home. I need my space and quiet. And honestly, Sophie and we have very different lifestyles. Oh, don't be silly, Chloe. Her tone shifted instantly from worried to annoyed. She's your sister. Family helps family. You have a whole spare room. You'll barely know she's there. She promises she'll be on her best behavior. Just a couple of weeks, honey. Please, for your father. And there it was. The emotional blackmail. The final, unbeatable move. For your father. She knew I couldn't refuse that. The promise I made on his deathbed was my kryptonite, and she wielded it without hesitation. I felt a wave of helplessness and resentment rise in me, but I swallowed it down, as I always did. Okay, I whispered, the single word tasting like defeat. A few weeks. But that's it, Mom. Oh, thank you, sweetie. You're a lifesaver. She chirped, her voice instantly back to normal. The crisis averted. Your father will bring her down this weekend. That weekend, they arrived. My father, Mark, looked uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze as he carried in Sophie's 3 oversized suitcases, a silent admission of his own complicity. Sophie walked in as if she owned the place, scanning my apartment with a critical frown. It's smaller than I thought, she remarked. My mother followed, carrying a basket of snacks as a pathetic peace offering. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for doing this. You're a good daughter." Her words were meant to be a comfort, but they just made me feel like a doormat. I showed Sophie to the living room, where the pull-out couch was. "You can stay here," I said. Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Don't you have a guest room?" "That's my office, Sophie," I explained. "It's where I work." "Oh, right," she said, tossing her purse onto my coffee table. "Well, I won't be here long anyway." But as I looked at those suitcases piled in the corner, a cold sense of dread crept over me. I had a feeling that Sophie's definition of not long and mine were two very different things. The storm had arrived, and I had just held the front door wide open for it. The couple of weeks quickly devolved into a farce. The first week, Sophie made an effort. She'd fold up the sofa bed in the morning and spent most of her time in her room, glued to her phone, supposedly job hunting. But by the second week, the facade began to crack. I'd wake up to find dirty dishes from her midnight snacks piled in the sink. The living room, which doubled as my secondary workspace, began to smell like a combination of cheap perfume and stale potato chips. Her presence was like a low-grade static, constantly eroding my focus and my patience. She'd blast the television while I was on a client call, forcing me to scramble into my bedroom and slam the door. She'd have friends over without asking. I'd come out of the shower to find a stranger rifling through my refrigerator. When I spoke to Sophie about it, she'd just roll her eyes. "God, Chloe, relax. They're just my friends. You're being so dramatic." Every time I tried to set a boundary, she acted as if I were a tyrannical landlord. I called my mother, hoping for backup. "Mom, this isn't working," I complained after Sophie had left her wet laundry on my hardwood bathroom floor for 2 days, causing it to warp. "She's not respecting my space. She's not even looking for a job. She's treating this place like a free hotel." My mother's response was predictable. "Honey, give her some time. She's depressed about the eviction. She needs your support, not your judgment. You're the big sister. You need to be more patient." She emphasized the words as if they were weapons, designed to make me feel guilty and selfish. And it worked. I hung up, ashamed for complaining. The violations became more personal. One afternoon, I came home to find my locked office, in disarray. Sophie was standing inside, holding a bobby pin. The lock was stuck, so I jimmied it open, she said brightly. I thought I'd help you organize. My inspiration board was a mess of rearranged images. My meticulously organized supply drawers were jumbled, and a stack of client briefs was out of order. It took me 3 hours to fix the chaos she'd created in 20 minutes. I was just trying to help. She'd insisted when I got angry, casting me as the ungrateful one. Then, she started to interfere with my personal life. I had been talking to a nice guy, Mark, from my hiking group. He was supposed to pick me up for our first real date on a Saturday night. When he arrived, Sophie answered the door in one of my silk robes, her hair wet. "Oh, hi," she cooed, looking him up and down. "You must be here for Chloe. She takes forever to get ready." When I came out, mortified, Sophie lingered, interjecting into our conversation, telling embarrassing stories from my childhood. The date was a disaster. Mark was polite, but the mood was ruined. He never called again. When I confronted Sophie, she claimed she was just trying to break the ice and accused me of having no sense of humor. Another boundary was my privacy. One evening, Sophie accidentally posted a picture of herself on social media, lounging on my sofa. In the background, a whiteboard with confidential client concepts was clearly visible. I only found out when the client called me, furious, asking why their unreleased product logo was on Instagram. I had to spend an entire day doing damage control, profusely apologizing and offering a discount. Sophie's excuse? It was a cute picture of me. I didn't even notice that boring board. The lack of awareness, or caring, was staggering. But the situation deteriorated most with my work. One evening, I came home from a client meeting to find Sophie wearing my favorite cashmere sweater, the one I had saved up for months to buy. A bright yellow smear of mustard was staining the front. "Sophie, what is that?" I cried, horrified. She looked down. "Oh, whoops. My bad. I was hungry and I couldn't find anything clean to wear." She said it so casually, as if raiding my closet and ruining my most expensive piece of clothing was a minor inconvenience. "You can't just take my things without asking," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "I'll try to wash it out," she said, starting to pull the sweater off right there in the living room. "Don't make such a big deal out of it." The final professional straw involved my tech startup client. They'd paid me a significant deposit, and the project was a potential career maker. The deadline was looming, and I was pulling 14-hour days to get it done. One afternoon, I took a quick break, heading to the kitchen for a cup of tea. When I returned to my office, Sophie was sitting in my chair, using my work laptop. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Just checking my email," she said. "My computer's dead." "Sophie, I've told you never to touch my work equipment. All of my client files are on there. It's not a toy." Okay, Madam CEO, she scoffed, getting up. So dramatic. Later that day, I realized she had accidentally closed the design program without saving, and I lost 2 hours of intricate work. After that, I set a new password on my laptop and started locking my office door when I wasn't in it. My home no longer felt like my sanctuary. It felt like territory that needed to be defended from my own family. I started spending more time at coffee shops, just to get away from the oppressive atmosphere in my own apartment. The resentment was eating away at me. I was losing sleep. My work was suffering. I felt like I was living in a pressure cooker, and it was about to explode. The wake-up call came from my best friend, Liam. He came over for dinner, and for the course of an hour, he witnessed the chaos. He saw how Sophie constantly interrupted me, how she ordered me around as if I were her waitress. "Chloe, can you get me a glass of water?" And how she left a trail of mess in her wake with no intention of cleaning it up. After Sophie left to meet up with friends, Liam turned to me, his expression serious. "Chloe, what are you doing?" he asked gently. "This isn't living. This is being occupied." "I know," I whispered, feeling tears well up. "But she's my family. My mom would never forgive me if I kicked her out." "So what?" he said, and his bluntness shocked me. "You're going to sacrifice your mental health and your career so your mom doesn't get upset? Chloe, think about your dad. Do you really think when he said take care of them, he meant let them burn your life down? He would be horrified. He would be telling you to stand up for the strong, independent woman he raised." His words were like a splash of cold water. He was right. My promise to my dad was to take care of them, not to let them destroy me. My father had been a strong, principled man. He would have been appalled to see how my mother and Sophie had twisted his words into a tool for manipulation. That night, I made a decision. It was time for Sophie to go. I had given her a month. I had given her my patience. Now, I needed to take my life back. The next morning, I told Sophie she had 1 week to find another place to stay. The resulting fight was epic. She called me selfish, heartless, a terrible sister. She cried, she screamed, and finally, she called Mom, who then called me to unleash a torrent of guilt and accusations. But this time, I held firm. 1 week, Sophie, I said, my voice cool and steady. You're out of here by the end of the week. She stared at me. Her eyes narrowed with fury. You're going to regret this, Chloe, she hissed. I didn't realize then just how prophetic those words would be. I thought the worst was over, but I had no idea they already had a backup plan, one that involved violating my trust in the most fundamental way possible. The week that followed was unbearably tense. Sophie treated me with an icy silence, broken only by sarcastic remarks or the slamming of doors. She made no move to pack or look for a new place. Instead, she spent hours on the phone with our mother in hushed, angry whispers. I knew they were plotting something, but I was too exhausted to care. I just counted down the days until I could have my space back. On Friday, the last day of my ultimatum, I had an all-day meeting with a client in the suburbs. The drive there was filled with a sense of anxious hope. I kept picturing my apartment that evening. Quiet, clean, mine. The thought was a beacon of light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. Before I left at 8 a.m., leaving Sophie sulking on the couch, I did something that felt slightly petty but necessary. I asked Sophie for the spare key I had given her when she first moved in. I need it back now, I said firmly. She glared at me for a long moment, before reluctantly digging it out of her purse and tossing it on the counter. Here, she muttered. Have fun in your little prison. I slipped the key into my purse, feeling a small knot of tension release. It was a symbolic gesture, a reclaiming of control. I told her, I'll be back around 6. I expect to see you packing your things when I get home. She didn't respond, just stared at the television screen. The meeting ran later than expected, and I didn't get home until almost 8 p.m. I was tired, hungry, and looking forward to nothing more than a hot bath in my quiet, empty apartment. As I walked down the hallway to my door, I felt a flicker of unease. I could hear a faint, thumping bass line. It's probably the neighbors, I told myself, trying to dismiss it. But as I got closer, the sound grew louder. It was coming from my apartment. When I put my key in the lock, my stomach dropped. The door was unlocked. I was meticulous about locking my door. It was second nature. I cautiously pushed the door open. The apartment was dark, but the sound was now a deafening roar electronic music pounding from the living room. The smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke hit me like a physical blow. It was the kind of cheap, acrid smoke that clings to everything. Sophie? I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I flipped on the hall light and stepped inside. The scene before me made my blood run cold. My living room was destroyed. Empty beer cans and liquor bottles littered the floor. Sticky rings stained my wooden coffee table. Couch cushions were thrown about, and there was a fresh cigarette burn on my favorite Persian rug. Worse, one of my framed art prints was on the floor, the glass shattered. But that wasn't the worst part. My eyes were drawn to the corner where my workspace was. My Wacom Cintiq graphics tablet, the most critical tool of my trade, a $2,000 piece of equipment I had saved for a year to buy, was lying face down on the floor. A large spiderweb crack spread across the screen. Next to it was a sticky, amber-colored puddle. "No," I whispered, rushing forward. I picked up the tablet, my hands shaking. The sticky liquid was some kind of cheap energy drink. The screen was cold and dead. It was ruined, completely beyond repair. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was an assault on my livelihood. All of my current projects, my client files, my custom brushes, everything was tied to that device. Without it, I couldn't work. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through me, overpowering the shock and fear. This was not an accident. This was deliberate. Sophie had done this. She had done this to get back at me. I pulled out my phone and dialed Sophie's number. It went straight to voicemail. Then I called my mom. She answered on the second ring, her voice sickeningly sweet. "Hello, dear." "Mom," I said, my voice ice. "Sophie destroyed my apartment. You need to tell me where she is right now." "Oh, honey, calm down," my mother said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "She's here with me. She showed up about an hour ago, very upset. Said you kicked her out. She threw a party and broke my work equipment, Mom. My $2,000 tablet is destroyed." "I'm sure it was an accident, Chloe. You're being hysterical. It's just a little mess. You can clean it up." Sophie would never do that intentionally. Maybe one of her friends spilled something. "How did she get in, Mom?" I asked, the real question burning in my mind. "I took her key back this morning." There was a brief, telling pause on the other end of the line. It was only a second, but it was long enough to confirm my worst suspicion. "Well," my mother stammered, "you know, your father and I thought it would be a good idea for us to have a spare, just in case of an emergency. So we went and had a copy made last week." The world tilted on its axis. They hadn't just enabled her. They had actively armed her. They had waited until my back was turned, then given her the weapon to invade my space, to destroy my property. They had chosen Sophie, again, definitively. They had chosen wrong. In that moment, every ounce of guilt, every sense of obligation, every remnant of the promise I had held on to for 6 years evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They had left me no choice. It was time to stop playing defense and start playing offense. After I hung up the phone with my mother, I sat amidst the wreckage of my living room for a long time. The initial blaze of fury had subsided, leaving a cold, hollow feeling in its wake. They thought they had me cornered, that I would once again clean up their mess, swallow my anger, and continue to provide. They assumed I had no other options, but as I sat there, staring at my broken tablet, a memory sparked in my mind, a small detail I had almost forgotten. About 4 months ago, there had been a string of break-ins in my building. Nothing major, mostly packages stolen from the lobby, but it was enough to put everyone on edge. Motivated by a combination of caution and a love for tech gadgets, I had invested in a smart home security system. It wasn't fancy, just a sensor on the main door and 2 small, discreet cameras, one pointed at the front door from the corner of the living room, and another in my office, aimed at my desk. I had installed them mostly so I could check if my packages had been delivered safely. I rarely ever looked at the footage. I had almost forgotten they were there. My heart started to beat faster. I crawled over to the television, where the router and security hub were hidden behind the stand. The small green light on the hub was blinking steadily. It was working. It had been recording everything. With trembling hands, I opened the security app on my phone. The interface loaded, showing a live feed of my trashed living room. I navigated to the timeline feature and scrolled back to 8:30 that morning, just after I had left. The footage popped up, astonishingly clear. I saw myself leaving, locking the door behind me. The apartment was quiet for about an hour. Then, at 9:45 a.m., the front door opened. But it wasn't Sophie who walked in. It was my mother. She looked around nervously before waving someone in behind her. My father entered, and behind him, looking smug, was Sophie. The footage was silent, but their actions spoke volumes. I watched, my stomach clenching, as my mother pulled a freshly cut, shiny key from her purse and handed it to Sophie. Sophie took it with a triumphant smirk. My mother patted her on the cheek and said something that looked like encouragement. Then, my parents left, leaving Sophie alone in my apartment. The betrayal was so blatant, so premeditated, it almost took my breath away. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. They had planned this. They had waited until I was gone, and then armed Sophie to defy my ultimatum. I fast-forwarded through the day. I watched Sophie invite a group of about 5 friends over around 2 p.m. I watched them drink my beer, eat my food. Then, the footage cut to the most damning moment. Around 5 p.m., the party had gotten rowdier. Sophie and a male friend were dancing foolishly in the living room. He stumbled, crashing into my desk, and my Wacom tablet slid to the floor with an impact I could imagine. There was no panic, no remorse. Sophie just looked down at it, shrugged, and then they laughed. They laughed. They continued to party for another 2 hours before leaving, with the door unlocked and my life in disarray. I saved the video clips, the key handoff, the tablet breaking, the laughing to a secure folder in the cloud. This was no longer my word against theirs. This was irrefutable proof. The next morning, instead of going to work, I called a lawyer. I searched online for attorneys specializing in property and civil disputes, and found a woman named Evelyn Albright who had stellar reviews. I booked a consultation for that afternoon. Miss Albright's office was in a modern glass and steel building, and she was much the same, sharp, precise, and no nonsense. I told her the entire story, from my father's death and my promise, to the repeating pattern of exploitation, and finally, to the tablet and the security footage. She listened intently, taking notes on a leather-bound pad. When I was done, she looked at me across her mahogany desk. "Miss Evans," she said, her voice calm and steady, "you don't just have a civil case for property damage. Your family has committed multiple offenses here. Copying your key without your permission and subsequently entering your apartment could constitute trespassing. Your sister hosting a party that resulted in damages certainly makes her financially liable. And your parents enabling this behavior makes them complicit." She paused, then added, "Furthermore, the destruction of your primary work tool could even be argued as tortious interference with your business. This is not a small matter." Her words validated every ounce of my anger. This wasn't just me being dramatic. This was a serious violation with legal consequences. "I see this more often than you'd think," she confided, her tone softening slightly. "Family disputes are the most painful, but the law doesn't make exceptions for blood relatives. Setting a legal boundary is not an act of aggression. It's an act of self-preservation. You have every right to protect your home and your livelihood." We worked out a plan together. Step 1. Draft a detailed demand letter, outlining the events, the video evidence, and our demands. The demands weren't just monetary. We demanded the return of the copied key, a written apology, and an agreement that Sophie would never be allowed in my home again without an explicit invitation. We also demanded that my parents acknowledge their role in the incident. Step 2. Arrange a family meeting where I would present the letter and the evidence. Let them talk first, Miss, Albright advised. Let them dig their own hole with their lies, establish their narrative on the record. Then, you present the truth. Oh, when I left Miss Albright's office, I felt a sense of empowerment I had never felt before. For years, I had been trapped in a role written for me by my family, the caretaker, the fixer, the silent martyr. Now, I had my own script. I had the evidence, I had legal representation, and I had a plan. The game had changed, and they didn't even know it had started. I chose the stage carefully. It wouldn't be my apartment. I refused to contaminate my space any further with their deceit. It wouldn't be their house, where they held the power. Instead, I booked a private conference room at a neutral hotel midway between our cities. I sent my parents and Sophie a brief, formal email. I need to meet with all three of you to discuss a serious family matter. Please be at the Westview Hotel, Conference Room B, on Sunday at 2 p.m. It is critical that we are all there. The tone was so different from my usual pleading, emotional emails that I knew it would put them on edge. I arrived 30 minutes early. I connected my laptop to the large monitor at the end of the room and queued up the video file, but kept it hidden. On the table, I placed 3 copies of the demand letter from Miss Albright's office, face down. When they arrived, they looked like a combination of annoyed and curious. My mother was the first to speak. "Chloe, this is ridiculous. A hotel conference room? After all we've done for you, you can't even meet us at home?" I felt it was important that we discuss this in person, without interruptions, in a neutral space, I said, my voice calm and professional. I had rehearsed this tone with Miss Albright. Keep emotion to a minimum. Stick to the facts. They sat down across from me. Sophie had her arms crossed, a pout on her face. My father just looked tired. "All right, Chloe, out with it," he said. "What's so important?" "I want to talk about what happened last Friday at my apartment," I began. "I want to hear your version of the story first." My mother immediately launched into protector mode. "We've been over this. It was an unfortunate accident. Sophie made a mistake by having friends over, and one of them got a little out of hand. She feels terrible about it." "Yeah," Sophie muttered, not meeting my eyes. "I said I was sorry. I don't know what else you want. I'll pay you back. Somehow." "How did you get into the apartment, Sophie?" I asked, keeping my gaze locked on her. "After I took your key back." Sophie glanced at Mom. My mother cleared her throat. "We talked about that too. We were worried about her. We thought you were overreacting by kicking her out, and we wanted to make sure she had a safe place to go if she needed it. So you made a copy of my key without telling me." "It was for emergencies, Chloe," my father interjected. "We never intended for Sophie to use it the very next day?" I finished for him. I turned back to Sophie. "So what time did this accident happen? Who was there? Can you give me the names of the friends who were there when my property was destroyed?" Sophie faltered. I don't know. It was a blur. It all happened so fast." "It happened at approximately 5:12 p.m., I stated flatly. "And you were laughing less than a minute later." "Does that sound like a blur?" A flicker of panic crossed her face. "Your version of events is, Sophie accidentally let herself in, accidentally threw a party, and an unnamed friend accidentally broke my $2,000 piece of property. Meanwhile, you were just acting out of concern. Is that an accurate summary?" "Yes, it is," my mother said definitively. "And I think you're blowing this wildly out of proportion and being incredibly cruel to your sister after everything she's been through." "Oh, thank you for clarifying," I said. Then I picked up the remote. "Now, let's watch the truth." I hit play. The first scene appeared on the large screen. my mother and father, standing at my apartment door, handing Sophie the new key. I paused the frame on Sophie's triumphant smirk, the shiny key in her hand. The silence in the room was deafening. My mother's face went white, a small gasp escaping her lips. My father looked like he'd been punched in the gut, his face slack with shock. Sophie just stared at the screen, her mouth agape. That's a misunderstanding, my mother sputtered. We were just arming her to defy my direct request, I said. Just enabling her to trespass in my home after I made it clear she was no longer welcome. I hit play again. I jumped to the party footage. I showed them the strangers milling around my home. Then I played the money shot, the male friend stumbling, the Wacom tablet crashing to the floor, and the moment after, I froze the frame on Sophie and her friend laughing. I let the image burn into the screen, into their memories. My father flinched as if he'd been physically struck. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with horror. Sophie's face had crumpled, the smugness replaced with raw panic. Is that the face of remorse, Mom? I asked softly. Is that the action of someone who is terrible? About an accident? No one spoke. They just stared at the frozen image of Sophie's gleeful mockery, projected larger than life. I turned off the monitor. The truth is, I said, my voice steady and clear, that all three of you conspired behind my back. You, Mom and Dad, deceived me and facilitated Sophie's disrespect. And you, Sophie, took advantage of their trust and mine. And then you maliciously destroyed my property. And then you all lied about it. I flipped over the demand letters and pushed them across the table. This is a letter from my attorney, Miss Evelyn Albright. It details the events, the video evidence we just watched, and my demands. My father picked it up with a shaky hand and began to read. My mother and Sophie looked over his shoulder. I gave them a moment to absorb the cold, legal language. It detailed the full replacement cost of the tablet, the cost to repair the rug, the return of the key, and the requirement for legally binding apologies. And what if we don't agree? My father asked, his voice hoarse. Then I will file a police report for trespassing and destruction of property, I said calmly. And Miss Albright will file a civil suit for damages, including punitive damages for the intentional nature of this act. This entire video, along with your financial records which we can subpoena, will become public evidence. I'd really rather not do that, but I will if you force me to. The room was silent for a long minute. The power dynamic had completely shifted. They had no lies left to hide behind, no emotional manipulation left to use. They were cornered by the undeniable truth of their own actions. Finally, my father gave a slow, defeated nod. Okay, Chloe, he said, and for the first time in years, he looked me directly in the eye. We'll do what you ask. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel smug. I just felt a profound, overwhelming sense of relief. The fight was over. I had won. I had my life back. The meeting ended in a heavy, strained silence. My father signed his copy of the letter, agreeing to the terms. My mother and Sophie followed suit, their movements stiff and reluctant. Sophie placed the copied key on the table. I picked it up and put it in my pocket without a word. As they filed out, none of them would look at me. The conference room door clicked shut behind them, and I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. That evening, I did two things. First, I ordered a new Wacom Cintiq tablet, putting it on my credit card, knowing the check from my father would arrive in a few days. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. Second, I called a locksmith and had the lock on my apartment door changed. As he handed me the new set of keys, I felt a tangible sense of security I hadn't realized I'd lost. That evening, After the locksmith left, I spent 2 hours cleaning. I threw away the trash, scrubbed the sticky floors, and aired out the apartment. It was a physical act of purging, of reclaiming my space from the violation. As I worked, I didn't feel anger anymore, just a quiet resolve. This was the last mess of theirs I would ever clean up. The next few days were strange. The silence from my family was deafening. No guilt-tripping phone calls from Mom. No demanding texts from Sophie. Just quiet. At first, it was unnerving. I was so accustomed to their chaos that peace felt unnatural. I found myself checking my phone, expecting a dramatic text, only to find nothing. The phantom limb of their constant needs was gone. But gradually, I began to relax into it. I could work for hours without interruption. I could leave my office door open. I could walk around my apartment in the evening and feel alone. In a good way. A week later, a courrier envelope arrived. Inside was a cashier's check for the exact amount I'd requested, and 3 handwritten letters. My father's was short and to the point. He apologized for disrespecting my boundaries and admitted he had let my mother's anxieties override his better judgment. "I failed to protect you, and for that I am truly sorry," he wrote. Sophie's was an angry, rambling scrawl about how I had humiliated her, but at the very end, there was a single sentence that seemed genuine. "I'm sorry I broke your tablet." My mother's letter was the hardest to read. It was 4 pages long, a stream of consciousness of self-pity, excuses, and thinly veiled accusations. She wrote that she was just trying to keep the family together and that I'd never understood the pressure she was under. Her apology was buried under so much self-justification. "I'm sorry if you felt hurt, but you have to understand that it was almost meaningless." I read it once, and then I put it away. I realized I couldn't control whether they truly understood. I could only control my own actions and the boundaries I set going forward. My life began to find its rhythm again. The new tablet arrived, and I threw myself into my work, grateful for the creative outlet. I finished the project for the tech startup, and they were thrilled. They signed me to a long-term retainer, securing my income for the next year. I met up with Liam and told him everything. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just hugged me and said, "I'm so proud of you." I started rebuilding my social life, which had atrophied during the months of Sophie's chaos. I joined the pottery class, something I'd always wanted to try. I started hiking on the weekends. I took a solo weekend trip to the coast, something I never would have felt free to do before, always worried about being on call for the next family crisis. I sat on a beach and watched the sunset, feeling the wind on my face, and realized I was truly, completely on my own, and it felt incredible. I was rediscovering who I was without the weight of my family's expectations on my shoulders. The immediate fate of my family, as I heard through the grapevine of relatives, was predictable. Sophie had to move back in with my parents. Without me to soften her sharp edges, her presence in their small house created constant friction. She still didn't have a job, and my parents, for the first time, seemed unwilling to cater to her every whim. They were being forced to face the consequences of their years of enabling. I had thought the break would be excruciatingly painful, and in some ways, it was. But what I hadn't expected was the feeling of lightness that came with it. It was like I had been carrying a heavy backpack for years and was finally allowed to set it down. I didn't know what the future held for our relationship, but for the first time I felt optimistic about my own. 4 months can change everything. For me, those 10 months felt like a renaissance. My apartment, once a battlefield, had now truly become a sanctuary. The quiet no longer felt foreign, it felt peaceful. My business had exploded. The retainer with the tech company led to referrals, And soon I had so much work that I had to hire a part-time virtual assistant to manage my schedule and invoicing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just financially stable. I was thriving. The biggest change wasn't external, but internal. The confidence I'd found in that hotel conference room had seeped into every aspect of my life. I was more assertive with clients, negotiating better rates and turning down projects that weren't a good fit. The pottery class had become a passion. I'd set up a small wheel in the corner of my office, and working with the clay became a form of therapy, a way to create something beautiful from nothing. I even sold a few pieces at a local craft fair, which was more thrilling than landing any big client. I made new friends, people who knew me only as Chloe, the freelance designer and amateur potter, not Chloe, the long-suffering older sister. I even reconnected with Mark from the hiking group, explained the weird sister situation, and we had a wonderful, uninterrupted second date. My relationship with my family underwent a slow, painful transformation. For about 3 months after the confrontation, we barely spoke. Then, my father started calling, maybe once a week. The conversations were awkward at first, filled with surface-level topics like the weather and sports. But gradually, he started asking about my work, about my friends. He was trying, in his own fumbling way, to rebuild a bridge. One day he said, "You know, your dad would be really proud of the business you've built." Coming from him, it felt like the highest praise. My mother took longer. She tried to fall back on her old tactics, the guilt-laced comments, the dramatic sighs, but they no longer worked on me. I learned to say, "Mom, I'm not going to have this conversation if you're going to speak to me that way," and then end the call. It took months, and many ended calls, but eventually, she began to understand. Her calls became less frequent but more genuine. She started asking questions and actually listening to the answers. She even sent me a small check for my birthday with a note that said, "For that certification course you always wanted to take. I'm sorry it took me so long." It was a small gesture, but it meant the world. Sophie was another story. Living under my parents' roof without me as a buffer had been a brutal awakening for her. They had forced her to get a job, and she landed a position as a retail associate at a clothing store. She hated it. She complained bitterly about it for the first few months. But then, something shifted. She got promoted to an assistant manager. She started talking about her work with a sliver of pride. She had to pay for her own car and insurance. For the first time in her life, Sophie was facing real consequences and was learning to stand on her own 2 feet. The breakthrough came about 8 months after the confrontation. Sophie called me. It was the first time she had initiated a call. "Hey," she said, her voice hesitant. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For real. Not just about the tablet. For everything." She explained how having to be responsible for herself had made her realize how selfishly and entitled she had lived. "I was always so jealous of you," she admitted. "Everything just seemed to come so easy for you. But now I realize how hard you worked. And I, and Mom and Dad, we took advantage of that." It was the most honest conversation we had ever had. It didn't erase years of hurt, but it was a start. We began talking more regularly. I even helped her redesign her resume when she decided to apply for a retail management course at the community college. Our relationship wasn't perfect. It probably never would be. But it was becoming real, based on a new, fragile respect instead of an old, toxic obligation. We all had Thanksgiving dinner together at my parents' house. The air was different. It was quieter, less dramatic. Sophie helped my mom with the cooking, and they were actually laughing together. My dad asked me about a design project I was working on, listening with genuine interest. During dinner, Sophie actually turned to me and asked for advice on a difficult employee she was managing. For her to ask for my professional opinion instead of competing with me was a monumental shift. Later, my father raised his glass for a small toast. To family, he said, looking directly at me. And to finding our way back to what's important. Justice, I realized, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about accountability. It's about people having to face the outcome of their actions and being given the chance to grow from them. By setting a hard boundary, I hadn't destroyed my family. I had given it its only chance to heal. They had to learn to respect me, and in the process, Sophie had learned to respect herself. I no longer carried my father's promise as a burden. I carried it as a reminder not to sacrifice myself, but to live a life of strength and principle that he would have been proud of. And as I looked around that Thanksgiving table, at a healthier, more honest version of my family, I thought that maybe, just maybe, I had finally fulfilled it. As I look back on the insane journey of this past year, the biggest lesson I've learned isn't about betrayal or forgiveness. It's about the value of peace. For years, I traded my own peace of mind to keep my family peaceful, but it was a false peace, built on my sacrifice and their enablement. It was a fragile truce that could be shattered at any moment by Sophie's next crisis or my mother's next manipulative plea. I've learned that protecting your space, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional, isn't selfish. It is the most fundamental act of self-preservation. Installing those security cameras was initially about protecting myself from strangers. I never imagined their most important function would be to protect me from my own family. But they did more than that. They showed me the truth in a way I couldn't deny, forcing me to stop making excuses for the people I loved and start facing the reality of how they treated me. Sometimes you need that unflinching, objective view to break out of toxic patterns you've been living in for too long, because your own heart is too invested to see clearly. Family is not a free pass to treat someone poorly. Love shouldn't come with a condition that you have to erase yourself to make room for others. And most importantly, you have the absolute right to set boundaries, even with the people you're supposed to love unconditionally. Standing up for yourself is terrifying, and it can feel like you're breaking everything. I was so afraid of being the bad guy, the one who tore the family apart. But I learned that sometimes the person who sets the boundary isn't the one breaking the family. They are the one trying to save it from the sickness that's been festering under the surface. Sometimes, you have to be willing to break something that's rotten to its core in order to rebuild something stronger and more honest on its foundation. My life isn't perfect now, but it's mine. And the peace that comes with that is more valuable than anything. I want to hear your stories. Have you ever had to set a difficult boundary with a loved one? What did you learn from that experience? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to hear more real-life lessons that might change your perspective. Remember to share this video with someone who might need to hear that protecting their own peace is the bravest thing they can do. Thank you for listening, and may you always find the strength to build a life you truly deserve.